You're listening to the Translated Chinese Fiction Podcast. I'm the host, Angus Stewart, and we have a guest today. Well, he's not here right now, I've already done the interview, but this show is going to be an interview with Dylan Levi King, a really awesome translator. So, who is he? Well, he has lived and worked in the People's Republic of China, including stints in Guangzhou, Nanjing, and Dalian. He once spent months in a detention facility in Datong and weeks at the Four Seasons in Shenzhen, so the highs and the lows. Now he lives in the tidy, dull neighbourhood in central Tokyo, where he spends his days eating convenience store curry, chain smoking Marlboro menthol ultralights, reading Guomo Raw, and attempting to learn Japanese. His translation of Dongshi's Record of Regret is available at Amazon, and you can read more of his writing on Medium. Yes, I did just read that off of ChinaChannel.org, but it was a great chat that myself and Dylan had. Before I launch into it, here's the plugs. So what you need to know, you need to follow our Instagram, TrChFic, on Instagram to get latest updates on what's coming up on the show. You don't need to, but you certainly could give a monthly recurring donation to the show on Patreon. That will help cover the SoundCloud hosting fees. Or, for a one-off, we now have a profile on getmeacoffee.com. Links to all that will be in the show notes. There's also going to be a link to Dylan Levi King's article on Floating City, possibly his favourite untranslated Chinese novel, a piece of 90s Chinese sci-fi that sounds super duper interesting. Okay, plugs done. Let's get on with the show. So now on the show, we've got a wee interview with Dylan Levi King. He's a translator of more than one work from Chinese. So without me fumbling an introduction, would you just like to tell us a wee bit about yourself, Dylan?
Yeah, sure. I've been working with Chinese translation for about 10 years now. And my first major work was Dongshi's Record of Regret, which came out through University of Oklahoma Press. I'm working on Jia Pinghua's Qinqiang right now for Amazon Crossing, and over the years, many smaller works that came out in places where people will never find them, like obscure journals and whatnot. I'm based in Tokyo right now, but I spent about 10 years going back and forth between China and Vancouver, where I went to school.
Okay, so are you Canadian then?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Got some family over there, but not in Vancouver. So I'm going to ask you a question. People ask me a lot. How and when did you first get interested in China or connected with China?
Yeah, I mean, my story is kind of maybe atypical. I was going to school, doing an undergraduate degree in political science, and I just sort of had the opportunity to go overseas somewhere. I wanted to go to Brazil or Southeast Asia, somewhere fun with drugs and women, but there's really no choices left, so I was kind of forced to choose China. And when I got there, I discovered, it's like landing on another planet. It's completely different from where I grew up, like out on the prairies in Canada.
Right.
And I mean, literature was my interest. So when I got there, it was complete, terra incognito, completely unknown. So when I started digging into it, and the more I dug into it, it was more and more fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So sounds a wee bit like how I ended up in China. I knew I wanted to go use my English degree to teach somewhere in, the far eastern end of the world, but I didn't have a particular country in mind. And then I landed on China. But of course, people always frame the question as, why China? When I guess for some foreigners, it's kind of a roll of the dice. And also, like, the place I ended up in was a small town. Where was the first place you landed when you landed in Terra Incognita?
Yeah, I went to Nanjing University first.
Okay.
But then I was just I was a bad student. I wasn't really interested in going to class because, as I said, I was looking for women and drugs, and I actually found them when I got to China. So that was a major distraction. And I ended up leaving the program and going to northern Jiangsu province to basically teach English and screw around for a while. And that's where I really got my that was really the best education possible. I learned so much more language and had so much more free time to go to the library and to read whatever I wanted.
Was that a Chinese library reading Chinese books?
Yeah. I mean, and when you go to a Chinese library, they usually have like the foreign languages press copies of like Outlaws of the Marsh and Journey to the West. So that's sort of what I got started reading first in English, and then going on to Chinese eventually.
That's cool. I did go to so I was in a town called Wukang, capital of Deqing County in Zhejiang, and they had a fab library, completely massive and modern, but they had plenty of foreign books translated into English, but there was never anything in English. At least they had one book in a collection, which was Mark Kitto's China Cuckoo, because it was based on a mountain nearby. But yeah, whenever I wanted to go to the library, it would be to bring my laptop and do work or read books I'd brought with me or my Kindle.
The thing I found when I got there was there was really nothing to read in English. Like once you got through those foreign languages press books, and if you went to the Xinhua bookstore in the middle of town, there'd be like a bunch of 19th century novels like Middlemarch and Jane Austen and whatnot. Right. So it's sort of like just out of necessity, like, oh, I gotta find something to read. And this is pre-internet in a way. I mean, I shouldn't say that because it was late 2005, but I mean less like crazy penetration of like ebooks and all those kind of things.
But that would be an era with less internet censorship as well, right?
Yeah, back when I first got there, you could go on Facebook. You could do whatever the heck you wanted, really.
Right. Were a lot of people there on Facebook in 2005?
Yeah, I think so. There was like those sort of like the 20-something people you would meet out. They would always be like, yo, add me on Facebook. Oh. Whereas now it'd be like, just put me on WeChat or whatever.
So in theory, there must be a lot of dead profiles out there that got cut off after Facebook got cut off.
Yeah, probably. I mean, and some of those kids who were on Facebook were the ones who were more likely to try to find a way to jump the wall. Lots of them like wanted to keep in touch with people.
That's fair. So was it? I know I'm probably digging into this too much, but I traveled in Jiangsu province quite a lot, but I could see there was quite an arm of the province that went north that I never really explored. Were you in one of the cities in the kind of the far north of Jiangsu, or was it really a small town?
No, it was a pretty big city called Xuzhou.
Oh, right, Xuzhou.
It's and basically like, you know, the Jiangsu, the southern part is beautiful and green, whereas the north is basically like Shandong province or eastern Henan province. It's quite rough and rugged. Yeah,
there is an Instagrammer I follow who he's a Chinese guy who photographs Suzhou, and he makes it look nice, but by photographing it nice with all the city lights. I think that's the only way he could maybe pull that off.
Yeah, I think every Chinese city is the same. Like there's like all those promotional pictures of like the one little area that they've redone in the last couple of years, but the rest is just horrifying.
Ooh. So you don't recommend Suzhou for a weekend break?
I mean, it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, like the famous products there are like dog meat tacos and some. Oof. They've got a museum of the tacos are really good, but they've got like they found some old Han Dynasty things there, so they've got quite a nice museum. But everything, all the charms of the old city and everything have been torn down, replaced with a Walmart and whatnot.
Well, dog meat tacos, interesting.
Yeah.
So that's your kind of your footstep, or your first foot in the door. We've explored that, but you mentioned your first kind of academic studies were in political science. So did you end up transitioning in academia to translation, or has it all been a lot more kind of DIY?
No, I mean, when I was there, I fell in love with a sweet Chinese girl who was a bookworm, and she introduced me to many great works of Chinese literature. And when I went back to Canada, I decided to change my major to Chinese, and I changed schools even. I went to the University of British Columbia, where they've got an amazing Chinese program, and a professor there in particular, Christopher Ray, who's published some of his own translations of Qing Dynasty humor and whatnot, early Republican humor. He just changed my life. He showed me how to read and introduced so many works that I wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. So I ended up getting a degree in Chinese.
Cool. And is that an undergraduate degree or is that a postgraduate degree?
No, undergraduate degree.
Oh,
I mean,
cool.
Pretty much everyone else I know has gone on to continue in academia. I think I'm one of the few of like my cohort of of translators of sort of the same age who have stayed out of academia.
And would your pals who are still in academia, would they have the time to, if they wished, to kind of do freelance translation or just non-academic translation? Like, is it a question of time or just disinterest/interest?
No, I mean, I think like if you look down the list each year of books coming out in translation from Chinese, I mean, like a huge percentage of them are done by academics. I mean,
right.
with Chinese, they're all the translators are academics except for a very short list.
Okay. It's interesting. This is the stuff that I'm only just learning, having kind of come in as a total, well, just a random doing a publishing degree.
Yeah, I mean
really
that's why the translations from Chinese are so often not very good. I mean, for the general reader, because they're done by these sort of cloistered academic types. Whereas I picture people who translate from like French to English are like cigarette smoking bon vivants who just are brilliant writers as well.
Right. Yeah, you would need. Do you know how many of these academics, not to sound snobby, but how many of these academics haven't spent much time inside China?
I mean, there's sort of a split, like with like the previous generation, they couldn't go to China. Like,
Right, of course.
you talk about Howard Goldblatt, who's like the dean of Chinese translation. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when he was getting his start, he had to go to Taiwan to learn Chinese, and so
Right.
many like Michael Duke, who's also another big name in Chinese translation. He's sort of Taiwan focused for that reason. But anyone who sort of came of age after, let's say, the late '90s, quite a few of them went over to China. Like Joel Martinson's been in China forever, and I could name names, but really, most of these academic translators have also spent a lot of time in China.
Okay. We did do one of Howard Goldblatt's books on the podcast, Wang Shua's Please Don't Call Me Human. Have you read that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've read every Howard Goldblatt translation. I mean,
Oh,
he's
right.
sort of like the Jay-Z of the translation world. I mean, you have to, even if you don't love him, you gotta check each new album.
Right.
He's
Yeah.
he's got a really interesting history, and he's sort of responsible for the work that I do today. If it wasn't for him, whether all of his work is great or not, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do this.
So if he's Jay-Z, who's Kanye?
I mean, I usually say Howard Goldblatt is Jay-Z and Nicky Harman is Nas,
Okay. I'll note that one down. That might be in the show notes as the wee hook
Please.
to get the listeners
Yeah.
in. Okay. So moving on to your present. So you're based in Tokyo, and I kind of had some wonderings to myself. Why could that be? Or is that helpful? Is it not helpful? But without me imposing my own musings, what are the advantages and disadvantages of being a translator of Chinese based in Tokyo rather than, say, Beijing or, I don't know, Vancouver?
I mean, it's part of it's practical. It's hard to be a freelancer and get a visa to just stay in China and screw around.
Right, yeah.
I wouldn't even know how to do it. It would be much more convenient if I was married to a Chinese woman, as many translators are, to make that whole process easier. But I mean, Tokyo is like a 3-hour flight from Beijing, so if I ever need to go do anything there, it's easy. Also, I mean, Tokyo is a city where if someone asks what you do and you say you're a Chinese translator, they won't think it's unusual. I mean, there's been thousands of years of Japanese intellectuals and academics closely engaged with Chinese
Right.
literature.
Mm.
It's it's sort of like a storehouse of Chinese culture. I mean, there's
Hmm.
still like huge Chinese departments in universities. People still read the Chinese classics and read contemporary Chinese literature. So in
Yeah.
that way, the cultural side, it sort of makes sense too.
I remember there was a time I was bored on WeChat and I was searching the name of just different bands I liked and WeChat usernames. I was that
Yeah.
bored. And I think I searched for Run the Jewels and I got this
Mm.
Chinese guy who loved hip hop and I started talking to him and it was like a mishmash of his basic English, my basic Chinese, lots of translation. And
Yeah.
he asked me like, what's your favorite traditional Chinese instrument? And I said, it's the chin, the chin.
Yeah.
Is that? No, the erhu, the one that's like the
The
very mournful,
fiddle kind of
the
thing.
fiddle. That's the
Yeah.
erhu, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he sent me some erhu music on
Mm.
QQ Music, and I said, hang on a minute, this is a Japanese track from Japan. And he said, yes, and he said exactly what you just said. It's because it's a storehouse. This is stuff that's had survived over there that was lost here, and hopefully is on its way back. So it's
Yeah. Exactly.
yeah. So it's interesting that you've kind of are part of that movement, maybe, or at least that trend.
Yeah, I mean, sort of distant from it in a way
Right.
because
Yeah.
my Japanese is not fluent, but it is a more Chinese city than you would think, and that's the kind of
Mm.
the classic influence, but also just like the presence of millions of Chinese people in Japan now.
Yeah. It's a thing I started to notice in so there's a couple things. Have you seen the film Old Boy?
Yes.
Yeah, so first time I watched that, it was long before I ever knew I was going to China, and I didn't really think much of the kind of presence of Japanese and Chinese stuff in that Korean film. But then there's
Mm.
like I realized later there's a whole sequence where they're going through Chinese restaurants called it's Golden Dragon, isn't it?
I think
Jinlong.
so. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and they're just trying all the different dumplings, and then suddenly all those things were leaping out at me. And the other one was, did you ever watch any version of Ghost in the Shell?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, all right. Well, in the TV show version, the second season, the whole plot is about a refugee crisis in Japan, and
Mm.
it's refugees from China, which is a bit of a hard to imagine scenario. But there's a lot of Chinese stuff in that if you're looking for it and if you know where it is in that season because of the presence of the refugees. But first time I watched it, again, it was in university studying English lit, and it was, Chinese and Japanese things look the same to me. And they were
Mm.
bouncing off. Anyway, I'm totally rambling now. Um,
It's the first
yeah,
Ghost in the Shell. The first Ghost in the Shell movie is set in Hong Kong, isn't it? Or am I thinking
yeah.
of something completely different?
Um, it's. I think its aesthetics are based on Hong Kong. I think
Hmm.
it's set in Japan, but the artist was basically drawing Hong Kong,
I
like
see. I see.
nineties Hong Kong, and you can see it again. Um, I had never been to Hong Kong when I first watched that film version and wasn't seeing it at all. But then I rewatched that version of the film, and then also the ridiculous what's she called? What's that actress? Black
Scarlett
Widow.
Johansson.
Yeah, the ridiculous Scarlett Johansson
Yeah.
version. And yeah, I had been to Hong Kong prior to having seen rewatching the original and then watching the Hollywood version. And I was like, oh yeah, that is Hong Kong. But I
I have
think,
one
sorry,
more wild digression.
oh please.
Do you know the Kowloon Walled City?
Um, no.
It's like this. Basically built in, I guess, the Qing Dynasty in Hong Kong. It was sort of this space that was always outside of the jurisdiction of the sort of Hong Kong city. So it was sort of
Okay.
just this massive fortress and a warren of tunnels and everything. It survived up till the 70s, I believe, but they recreated it in Tokyo and built it
Oh,
into an arcade. There's an arcade inside, and they've sort of meticulously recreated this weird ghetto of Hong Kong in Tokyo. So Yeah,
That's
just a
amazing.
wild digression. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I always found it interesting as a complete outsider, seeing all the interactions between, the China, Korea, China, Japan, Japan, Korea, but like especially in Shanghai, where I was spent most of my time in China, has a massive Koreatown, but the Koreatown isn't just a Koreatown. It's kind of a hub for all the foreigners from neighboring countries rather than foreigners from, the English speaking or Western world.
Right.
And just as someone who didn't really have a dog in the race, it was a really interesting place to walk around.
Mm.
Anyway, I think we should stop rambling about these things.
Yes, get back on track here.
Yeah, so Sophie's Diary. So I've literally just read that for the first time. I chose to read it as a PDF. I'll get into that in a minute. But what's your history with the Diary of Miss Sophie or Sophie's Diary, or what's your history with reading Ding Ling?
I mean, it would have been something I read in probably fourth year Chinese class.
Okay.
Reading in the original, and
Mm.
I know I have on my shelf a copy of the Tanny E. Barlow translation, which is like a collection with, I think it's called "I Myself Am a Woman."
Yeah, my
Which
PDF
is,
was a clip from that.
yeah, I think it came out shortly after she had died, I believe in the early 90s.
I'll bring up the
So
PDF. I think it's about that. Let me see. It's got the year on because the PDF, it's just the story, but they have the cover page of the book. Let me see.
sure.
It's being slow.
But yeah, I mean,
19. Sorry, keep
in
going.
in
1989, apparently.
1989, I
Yeah.
so close to so old now, but
Yep. I feel you.
yeah, there's sort of an emphasis in undergraduate Chinese courses, and especially Chinese education in the West, when you look at literature, to look at those May 4th writers. I mean, they're very easy to teach. I mean, they were very influenced by Western literature and sort of, the individualist, modernist forms that are
Right.
quite easy to talk about.
Yeah. Make me feel lazy for doing. That's two I've done on my show now because first episode was Lu Shun. But you're right. Yeah, they're not at all alien. They feel
No, I
pretty
mean,
comfortable.
yeah, I mean, I really kind of dislike that era of literature myself, to be honest. I mean, maybe because I was forced to read so much of it. I mean, I sort of more appreciate it as like a movement, like the new culture movement itself, rather than the actual works it produced, like Lu Xun. I never want to read Lu Xun again.
I know that you were on the Chinese literature podcast before, and I seem to remember listening to one of their episodes on Lu Shun, and one of those guys, yeah, really wasn't digging it. I think for similar reasons.
No, I mean, I think we can all be honest that Lu Xun is not good. But what a powerful contribution to Chinese culture. But his writing, we don't need to read it anymore.
Okay, I've only read Diary of a Madman. I think I had that collection of short stories, and yeah, I started another one and kind of lost interest. But I was reading on an iPhone screen, which probably wasn't helping.
No.
No. Um, right. So that kind of leads into the next question really nicely. Because this is the second kind of new culture book we're doing. That we're doing on the podcast, and it's also in a diary form. So do you think it's got any? Do you think it could be any kind of a response to the Lu Xun Diary of a Madman, or do you think there's a reason why the diary form got used at least these two times? Do you know if there's any other new culture books that take the form of a diary?
You that's a good question. Probably somebody listening to this is just thinking of like three
Yeah,
different diary
yeah, and they're
short stories.
screaming into their phone right now.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe Yu Dafu maybe might have done the same trick, but I think it's just like the best way to pull off the trick that they were trying to do, which is just sort of like foreground that interiority, foreground that
Mm,
individual sort of message.
yeah,
Um, I think that's just the best form to do that in, the simplest form to do it in.
Although I think it's not my original thought. I don't know if I heard this on the Chinese literature podcast or something I read, but Miss Sophie's Diary is way more interior than Diary of a Madman, because this one's like an emotional roller coaster, whereas it seemed like Diary of a Madman, although what he's seeing is obviously may not be completely real, it's not an emotional outpouring like this one is.
Yeah, I mean, like those Lucian kind of those writings are sort of made not just as like a portrait of an individual, but also, you know, they can be read as, you know, about China, whereas, you know, Dingling's writing is incredibly personal. I mean, it's political by being intensely personal, whereas Lucian was kind of another thing altogether.
Yeah, I think as I was reading this one, I was thinking, oh, okay, how can I read like a picture of the country in its present state into this? And I felt like I couldn't really, apart from like the kind of her as a new woman, how she would fit into both kind of world trends at the time and Chinese trends, and like looking for Western or cosmopolitan influences in the book. There was mentions of like things in urban life, like cinema, newspapers, advertisements, and there's her love interest is a Singaporean, and there's references to speaking English, but like really overt references to the foreign powers in Beijing, I feel like they aren't really there. They're only kind of there by inference.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I think this, for me at least, it kind of stands above or stands up to rereading more than other May 4th literature, where with that literature, I've gotten the message. I don't really care. But with Dingling's writing from that period, I mean, it's so emotional and so powerful and so personal that you could really stands up to pulling it down from the shelf again.
Mm-hmm. And it's fairly brief. So it's 18 pages in my PDF. First two are the cover, so that would be 16 times 2, just 32 pages of this book. I felt it got a wee bit repetitive, but maybe it was because it was a character focused. It's not got an awful lot of plot in it, so it seemed to be definitely just about the human beings and what they were doing. No fancy descriptions.
Just intense focus on her. I mean, that book it's been, I think, just as influential as Lucian's writing, but for different people. I mean, I think you can look through, Chinese and Taiwanese women writers through the past 40 or 50 years and just see that it all started with Dingling.
Mm-hmm. It was definitely so on my podcast Instagram, I've been trying to figure out the best way to get reactions and interest from people. So what I did for this one was I posted a wee picture of her and said, "Who knows who this is?" I did that on Twitter as well. Yeah, you responded to that, didn't you? You took the bait.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, that's how we're having this chat. And I don't know how much of it was the format, and I don't know how much of it was Dingling and the kind of popularity she has, but it definitely got a reaction. Maybe a reaction I wouldn't have got if I'd popped up, I don't know, one of her more generic male contemporaries.
Yeah, I mean, she looks sexy as hell in those old black and white pictures from like the 20s and 30s.
Yeah. What else can I say? Yeah. So on the topic of, wait, no, hang on. Give me a sec. Yeah. So here's a question. All that umming and ahhing is going to get edited out, by the way. So you've got a fairly good knowledge of, I guess, both how she's read in China and in the West. Would you say she's more popular in her home country than with readers of Chinese fiction abroad? Or would you say there's differences in the ways that she's appreciated? Or is it more or less the same everywhere?
I mean, she was basically, she was sidelined for most of her life. I mean,
Yeah.
starting in like the 40s, she wrote "The Sun Shines Over the Sanggan" and whatnot. But after that, from like 1958 to the late 1970s, she was either on a commune or in solitary confinement or just unable to write. I mean, she was basically erased from history. I think you're right that she does have more of a profile in the West, with that Tiny Ear Barlow collection. When that came out, I think it really got people to start reading her again.
Right.
I mean, but like I said, I mean, when you look at people like there's this book called Shanghai Baby.
Oh
Came out in
yes.
1999, translated by Bruce Humes. I mean, it's you have to see the fingerprints of Dingling's 1920s writing on that, and like Taiwanese writers like Liang and Zhu Tianwen. These women who sort of followed in her footsteps and wrote these intensely personal books about women. So I mean, I think her influence is huge on Chinese writers, but I don't think anyone's really. I think she does have a larger profile in the West.
I can tell you a story that about a place that kind of gave me ideas, or it gave me some initial interest in Chinese writers. So there's an area of Shanghai, I think I mentioned it in the Lu Xun episode, which is called Writer Street. I'm trying to remember the name of the district it's in. Oh dear. Hongkou district, which was
Okay.
where a lot of the Chinese left-leaning modernist writers lived. And it was kind of a minor irony, because that was the part of colonial Shanghai that was administered by Japan.
Right.
But there's this whole area which is kind of dedicated to Lu Xun. Shanghai's big, really nice Lu Xun Park is there. It's got one of the many Lu Xun museums. But there's like an actual street which has like bookshops, ink and pen shops, and it's got some wee stone murals of these various kind of Republican era writers. And the only two I think I could recognize Lu Xun by sight at that point, but Ding Ling got pointed out to me, and at first I thought, that's a silly name, but then I kind of heard more and more about her. So that's a preface to this question. How do you think the kind of re-acknowledgement or re-recognition of Ding Ling might have come about in China? Do you think it could have been kind of a return from Taiwan, her popularity in Taiwan kind of spilling into a more free China? Or if you don't know, that's because I
No,
certainly
I
don't know.
mean, I think I have just a boring answer that it's just sort of a rehabilitation. I mean, she did have she was there from the start. She went to Shanxi. She was a revolutionary,
Yeah.
and I mean, it was just sort of political uh, nonsense that had her sidelined. So I think it's just a sort of just a rehabilitation of her, legacy from the 40s and the 50s.
So it was, in a sense, the government that allowed her to kind of come back as a well-read Chinese writer inside China.
Yeah, I mean that the part of the project of rehabilitating all those people that were marked as rightists was kind of a big political program of reform and opening and modernization of the country. I mean, it was seen as a big deal that the government was allowing those people to come back. I mean, she sort of benefited from that more than anything. She had really good connections, also in the government. I mean, they didn't save her when she was sent to Xincheng prison in Beijing, but she still had those connections when she resurfaced in the late 70s and early 80s. So yeah, I don't think there's an interesting answer to that question, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, when she first, I don't know if this is what you want, but when she first got out of prison in 75, she was sent to Shanxi again. She
Okay.
reunited with her husband, who had actually been held in the same prison as her, like I think a couple cells away from
Oh,
hers.
geez.
Yeah, and so there was just sort of constant thawing after that 1975 release when she was sent to Shanxi. By that time, she was already, in her early 70s. So she used some of her connections and her husband's connections to come back to Beijing in I think probably the early 80s, and she reunited with all those writers, many of whom had been marginalized as rightists, like Shen Congwen was probably there, and she just sort of rebuilt that network, which was sidelined during most of the 70s, and she sent petitions off to big leaders who were very keen to distance themselves from the sort of the radical leftism of the 70s. And she sort of, even though she was getting on in years, she was in her 70s by then, she sort of managed to build up her reputation again in her networks.
So a lot of it was her own doing, not some big government program to publish her books or some such.
No, I mean, they when she came out in 78, sorry, in 75, 78, I think she was fully rehabilitated. There was
Mm.
she republished a book, or revised a book that she had been working on before she was sent to prison. But I think that was her only major publication after that. I think there was
Okay.
also a memoir of her time in a commune called, I guess translated as Cow Pen. But yeah,
Cowpen,
she
right?
was she was an old woman by then. She really
Of course,
did her
yeah.
best, but she she was nearing the end.
Okay, so I think that's just about enough about Sophie's Diary and Dingling. So now some kind of more nitty gritty questions,
Sure.
all about being a translator of Chinese to English. So since you might have some particular knowledge here, could you tell us a wee bit about the role of university presses in getting stuff from Chinese into English and getting it out there?
I mean, that's huge. As I said, all these translators are academics, and their biggest outlet is university presses. When you look at the list of what's come out each year in translation, you see the same names every year. It's always Columbia University Press, usually University of Hawaii, which publishes a lot
Oh,
of Howard Goldblatt's books.
I see.
Yale University, Duke University, University of Oklahoma, which put out a book that I did recently. But they are basically the the major publishers of Chinese fiction in translation, things that are of academic interest, translated by
Hmm.
academics and mostly read by academics as well, I think.
And are there any university presses from outside North America that are as prolific with Chinese books?
In English, I can't think of a UK
Hmm.
university publisher off the top of my head that does a lot of Chinese fiction. There's
I
not
don't.
really even many
Yeah.
Canadian ones. There's University
Right.
of British Columbia Press puts out a little bit, but it's those American university presses that are, especially those like top five university presses, are just have the translation market cornered for Chinese.
Right. Maybe we need to up our game over here on this side of the pond. I do know the big one of the big UK nexuses for uh, Chinese writing and translation. It's the Leeds University has a centre for Chinese writing, but I don't think they
Right.
actually have a press, as far as I'm aware.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I think they're quite tied up with or interwoven with Nicky Harman's Paper Republic. Although I'm not an insider, so I don't know how the connections work. But I think there's quite
Me
a lot of
neither. Me neither.
overlap. Yeah. Okay.
And
So
and
that's yeah.
the question could be, why do Americans put out so many Chinese books in translation.
Yeah.
I mean, I think part of it is just like a lot of these academics were, sort of relics of the Cold War. Like Howard Goldblatt got his
Yeah.
education in Chinese in when he was in the Navy, and
Right.
yeah, I think it's that Cold War relationship with that Cold War tension with China that produced so many people who were studying China.
That would make sense. I definitely know. So one thing that led to the creation of this podcast was me having returned to the UK. Actually, it was even before I returned to the UK. I was just looking for podcasts to listen to because I became slowly and more addicted. So in China, I was looking for podcasts about China, and the majority of them are, well, had no interest in business, or almost no interest in business podcasts.
Yeah.
But with those cast aside, the vast majority were politics, international relations, geopolitics, and those were interesting enough for me to listen to. And yeah, a lot of them seem to be tied to universities. And I guess probably also one advantage the US has is a great big American Chinese population. I think proportionally it's probably quite a bit larger than the UK.
And I mean, like increasingly, close business relationship with China,
Yeah.
and especially the universities are just making a ton of cash off of China and doing big business with launching campuses in
Oh,
China as well.
that the UK is doing that too. There's actually, I think my university, Edinburgh Napier, it's an old former polytechnic, not an old traditional established university, but it's opening up some tartan color. It's opening up a school in Shenzhen which has like tartan carpets and is totally amping up the Scottishness. But of
Very
course,
shameless, completely
exactly.
shameless.
In our campus here in Edinburgh, we'd never do that. We'd never have a tartan carpet. But in Shenzhen, why not?
Yeah, throw the tartan down.
Yeah, and I have an uncle who's a geography professor in which uni is it? It's in England. He betrayed us. Durham University, and he does quite a lot of trips around the world, trying to recruit overseas students. And China's the place that I think gets the most visits.
Does he
Just
throw his kilt on when he goes? Does he throw the tartan on?
he should, but I think
Yeah.
because he's representing an English university, that would just cause confusion.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, but I'll mention that to him if I'm in touch
For
with him
sure.
anytime soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll give you a percentage of the proceeds.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's university presses. And you mentioned earlier you're working with Amazon Crossing just now as well.
Oh, yeah, I mean, Amazon is a beast in the world of Chinese translation. I mean, I maybe it's a conspiracy theory, but I think it has something to do with their deal to sell books in China. I think they have some interest in promoting Chinese books as well, but they have completely changed what's being published and who's translating it, rather than those university presses who are mostly interested in works of academic or literary interest. They've been able to branch out to maybe work that wouldn't be translated or would come out on a very small press before. So, I mean, they're an evil corporation, of course. I mean, there's no denying that, but they've been very good for the Chinese translation market.
Yeah, all through the taught part of my course, because I'm on the dissertation part now, it's like a weekly reminder of, yes, Amazon are incredibly evil. So you don't need to convince me of that one. But that's fantastic, because what my dissertation is kind of going to be looking for, it's exactly what part of Chinese writing is being missed just because the market wants banned in China books, and the market wants this kind of book, that kind of book. So if do you think that the books that Amazon Crossing would be bringing into the English speaking world would be a bit more kind of like pop Chinese fiction, less heavy and literary, or more genre fiction?
I mean, their record so far is sort of an emphasis on, I guess, more pop literary stuff. I mean, some of it's quite, far from, pulp fiction airport books. I mean, last year they did a Jiapinghua novel
Oh yeah.
translated by Nicky Harman. They did a book by Lu Mei called A Tree Goes in Daicheng. You'd think they would do more, popular books. Their choices have been quite good so far. They haven't really gone deep into genre fiction, but more popular literary stuff.
Okay. Popular literary stuff. Cool. Did I have a follow-up question? Don't think I do. Yeah. So that's Amazon. Would you like to tell us a wee bit about your life and your work and the business of being a translator and all the ins and outs of that, since it's still a total mystery to me and quite possibly a mystery to a lot of our show listeners?
Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about that because sometimes people email me and say, "How do I become a translator?" or
Okay,
something
so
like that. And it's really I believe that it is impossible to make a living as a translator from Chinese to English. I managed to do it, but only by living in a very cheap place. For a book from a university press, the first book I translated, I got $7,000, and that was, that's translating a novel. It's several months time, so it's almost necessary to be either in academia or have a very lucrative day job to to back that up. I mean, it's basically a lonely, poorly compensated job where you're publishing books that very few people read and even fewer critics review. It's a very
ouch.
dark work.
Yeah, that description just sounded darker with each item on the list. Jeez.
Yes, but I mean, if you do it well, if you line up some translation work on the side that's not literary fiction, you could use that to subsidize your work with literary translation, and you could live pretty well. You could not have a day job, which is, I mean, that's what I think everyone should be aiming for. So
Yep.
it's not that dark.
I'm sure it's satisfying anyway.
Yeah, it's very satisfying. It's nice that to just to know that I don't have to do anything else. I just have to completely lose myself in a novel, even if it's only paying $7,000 to translate it. It's still the opportunity to completely tear apart a novel and rebuild it.
I actually remembered what I was going to ask from before. It's about lighter fiction, super light fiction, actually.
Sure.
So when I was at London Book Fair, there was this company I stumbled across called Web Novel, they're an offshoot of Qidian, which is a Chinese online kind of light fiction platform.
Yeah.
And they are translating, I think, with professional freelancers, and I think like just web users who get paid in, I don't know, little microtransactions. They're bringing books over from Qidian into English on an international platform, and I think they're also getting writers to contribute to a web novel in English, but a lot of it's got a bit of a Chinese vibe to it, whether it's based on ancient Chinese culture or whether it's just got a flavor. So one of their top novels, it's about the main character is a professional gamer. So of course that's not, it's got a bit of a Korean flavor to it, I suppose.
Right.
But have you stumbled across anything like that in the world of
Yeah.
translating?
Yeah, I actually had a side job maybe a couple years ago now doing wuxia novels, so like
Oh,
Chinese
cool.
fantasy novels, for very little payment. But it was surprising that there was actually somebody paying for it, and there was just an impressive readership for those translations in English. And
Yeah.
like you said, it's mostly, like non-professional translators, mostly people who just love the books, translating them. Not always really great translations, but there is just like just a massive number of those web novels out there, and people reading them in English translation.
Yeah, it's something that I don't know if there has been academic writing on it. It's something I want to fish around in for my dissertation because it seems like a total like iceberg thing. If you take a passing glance, you see a little bit, but yeah, it seems like there's a massive kind of unofficial readership of this stuff. Makes me wonder who these people are.
I mean, like even when you go beyond like that genre fiction stuff, there's always been like since the 2000s, just a large number of literary works as well put up online. You know, people who are completely, you know, the publishing industry works different in China than it does here. There's sort of
Oh
less
yeah,
of a chance of breaking in. You can't really just write a brilliant novel and start sending it off to publishers in China. So there was just like people who built a name for themselves off of those web novels. So it's sort of
yeah,
for every, you know, big book that comes out, there's like a million that are just circulating on the web.
yeah. Well, one of the episodes I did was on Murong Shueatsun and Leave Me Alone, and
Yeah,
that's how he did it amazingly.
yeah, he's one of the success stories coming out of that world.
Hmm. Okay, so I've in my wee brackets here. I had a few kind of specific areas for uh, the kind of job of being a translator I'd like to ask about. So there's
Sure.
payments, contracts, and pitches. What can you tell us about those things?
It's just an absolute hassle. You know, like I said, the work is dark, but it's actually like trying to figure out how to deal with publishers. That's the real dark work. I've been really interested in this novel recently called Fu Chang, which is usually translated as Floating City. It's by a writer
Yeah.
named Liang Xiaosheng. He's sort of like it's kind of a sci-fi novel. It's about a city that floats away from the mainland, sort of drifts off into the Pacific. Just an amazing book. It's a huge bestseller in the original, but you know, trying to shop it around to publishers. You know, most of them won't talk to you if you don't have a, you know, they don't want to talk to anyone who's not an agent.
Right.
And then there's just the issue of securing the rights to it from the Chinese side, where there's never a clear cut situation with rights. The writer will usually say, I don't know. The publisher will say, yeah, maybe, but there might have been another publisher along the way who grabbed the international rights. So it's just a pain to do that sort of business work on the side of just being a translator. It's so
Mm.
much nicer if a publisher comes to you to pitch a project. Um, Hopefully, I'm at the in the position where from now on, mostly publishers will be pitching me on things rather than the other way around. But I'm just at the moment suffering through trying to get this floating city book placed with somebody.
Yeah. I read the wee synopsis or blurb of Floating City that you sent me, and it sounds absolutely amazing. And it just made me think. So there's a bit of a wave of new Chinese sci-fi that's got quite a lot of buzz just now. So it would seem like the iron would be hot to try and get Floating City out there, even if it is what originally published in the 90s. Is that right?
Yeah, originally published in the '90s, but it was just such an important book that sort of inspired all these later writers. I mean, it's name checked directly in lots of these new sci-fi novels that have come out in translation.
Mm.
It was just sort of a groundbreaking book that needs to be translated. But
Yeah.
it is old, and I mean, grant money for doing Chinese translation from of science fiction is not so forthcoming. So if you're dealing with publishers who mostly get funding from Chinese sources, they're not really interested in trying to secure a grant for a Chinese sci-fi novel. You sort of have to go to these people like Tor or Head of Zeus, and
Yeah, I
they've
was about
got
to say Head of Zeus because they've all the Chinese sci-fi books I've got on my bookshelf are Head of Zeus.
yeah, but they've sort of they have a limit to what they can publish and how much they can publish, and you have to go back to the writer himself, who's very who's insisting on a certain type of publisher. So it's
Oh,
hard to get these books out.
what kind of publisher does he want?
I mean, he was burned in the past I mean, as he sees it, when it came out in Korean, I mean, he has some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder about his book being put out by some Korean pulp press, and he wasn't happy about it. So I guess he wants it to come out on Simon and Schuster or something. I don't know
Oh,
what
geez.
his deal is. Yeah,
Well, I guess I can sympathize, but oh my goodness, what a pain.
yeah, and he's a very old man
Oh,
now, and yeah, so there's many when you see these books come out in translation and you look at the list and you see it's not a very long list. I mean, it's not all because there's limited interest in Chinese fiction, but also
right.
many issues with publishers and rights and securing all that.
Hmm. That's something I hadn't properly considered, all the different barriers. And as I understand it, China's a trick rights-wise, it's trickier than other countries, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the situation of Jia Pinghua, he's basically the king of Chinese literature. He's one of the greats. He should have the Nobel Prize, but he's been kind of stymied by by rights. I mean, there's absolute confusion to this day of who owns the rights to what. I mean, his people have given the rights to person X, and then they gave the rights to other books to person Y, but there was sort of a
Uh,
crossover between the two lists, so it's it's tricky.
so
Nobody
it's
knows who owns the
yeah,
rights, and there's often no real contracts, so it's hard to nail
right.
down who has what when.
So it's not the cliche of the Chinese system being too strict. It's actually like the reality you come across. I came across over and over where the laws are actually too loose. Nothing's clearly defined, so
Yeah,
anything
nobody
can
really
happen.
like if you did a book and you maybe there was some discussion of international rights, maybe there was a contract signed in like 1991 for that floating city book, but since then it's changed hands to all different publishers, so
Oh,
probably
geez.
it's in the writer's control, but he doesn't know and he doesn't really give a damn either. So
No, if I was the writer, I'd find that far too exhausting to think about.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so you mentioned Jia Pinghua, and um, you let me know that you're working on a translation of his book Qinqiang, aka Shanxi Opera. Is that right?
That's right. I'm working on it with Nicky Harman right now. She's I know I've said it a million times, but she's really the best translator
Mm,
working right now. So it's a great opportunity to work with her. And Jia Pinghua is his books really changed my life. I mean, when I was in northern Jiangsu and came across them, they sort of opened a whole other world. So to finally get the opportunity to work with both Jia Pinghua and Nicky Harman, it's just wonderful.
so you picked up his books in Suzhou.
Yeah, I mean, particularly, he put out a book in I believe 1990, 1992, I forget. It's translated as Ruined City by
Right.
Howard Goldblatt. It's basically the greatest work of Chinese literature. It's about a writer and a rural upstart, and it's got sex, and yeah, that's about all it has. And it was it's I sort of read it at the perfect time when other people might read, Updike or Garcia Marquez or something like that. It sort of just opened up a new horizon. I do like Chinese literature, but deep down, I'm basically a fan of Jia Pinghua, and his writing is what I've wanted to translate from the very beginning. That's all
Okay,
I've cared about for about 10 years.
it's good to have a goal. I think,
Yes.
yeah, my interest in reading Chinese fiction probably really kicked off with Cixin Liu and his sci-fi trilogy.
Mm.
Um, so that's probably why I'm so interested in stuff that doesn't fit the mold of like a standard literary translated book. It's really interesting to see the possibilities when you read a piece of genre fiction that's just trying to. And I feel like he probably, yeah, I suppose he wasn't just writing for Chinese readers, but it's got the feel of a book from China, which isn't and is authentically Chinese, but isn't all about China. And yeah, so that's probably I'm kind of partly stuck in that mindset, and it's just the mindset I had of reading the first book and thinking, wow, this is totally something special.
Yeah, but I think going forward, I mean, I think there'll be a lot of people who share that same experience of reading Cecilio and just going to dig deeper into what's out there. I think that's sort of a big moment for Chinese translation.
Yeah. With my podcast's Instagram account, I follow a few of the different hashtags that I post under.
Yeah.
And I think under like hashtag Chinese literature, it's very often people taking pictures of their three body problem books that pops up under Chinese literature. So hopefully that's the start of a ball rolling, and it'll be not just that book and not just classics that start popping up.
We can only hope.
Indeed. Okay, so another book, one you've finished translating. Actually, no, rewind. You mentioned you're working with Nicky Harman on translating Shanxi opera.
Yes.
And I also know the link you sent me about that was on a website called Ugly Stone, which seems to be all about translating Jiapinghua. Is that right?
Yeah, there's this a fella named Nick Stember. He's one of those academics. I think he's at Cambridge right now. I've known him since probably 2009, and he was one of those people who were given the rights to Jiapinghua's international rights. So he set about promoting them. He made the Ugly Stone website and put out sample translations and informations on the very few at the time existing translations of Jiapinghua. And since he launched the website, there's just been a flood of Jiapinghua books in translation. Not solely because of Nick Stember's project, but he was a big part of the reason there's so many Jia books out in translation.
It's a really nice website, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of screwed over by the rights situation, the confusion over it, but I mean, he's doing fine, and Jiapinghua is doing fine in translation. So hopefully there's no hard feelings.
Cool. And just a question about, so having two people, yourself and Nicky Harman, working on translating the book, is it kind of like a teacher and a student role? Is she kind of mentoring your way through it, or are you kind of sharing the workload? How does that work?
Well, I kind of see it as a teacher student thing, although she's very resistant to that idea. But yeah, I've learned a lot from her. I had some very kind of strange ideas about what makes a good translation, and she's sort of steered me towards a better way of doing things.
Okay. Is she making your thinking a bit more conventional, or just a bit more kind of common, like, I don't know, accurate?
I think I all those university presses who put out Chinese books translated by academics, they're all of a certain style. They're not very good. They're 100% accurate translations, but they're just a slog to read through.
Right.
You can always see the Chinese original through them, Whereas Nicky Harman is just quite adept at taking the original and translating it in a way that it preserves the flavor, the spirit, the original essence, while actually being in beautiful modern English. Whereas I was very infected by that style of wanting to have 100% accuracy and
Right.
Don't change a single word. Where she actually writes books, she translates books that people actually read. So I've learned a lot from her in that way.
Yeah, I think I mentioned on the podcast. I on one hand, I like it when the translated book I read is very kind of naturalistic and readable, but I also kind of get a weird fun in if the prose is just a wee bit askew, then, or if there's something that feels like I'm seeing the original text through the slightly askew prose, I can kind of enjoy that. But that said, I have actually had a really bad experience reading a translated work. It was when I sat down to read, this makes it sound like I did it in one sitting. Of course I didn't. The Hong Lo Meng, Dream of the Red Chamber on my Kindle. Right. And I was reading like the first Victorian translation, and oh my God, That was a mistake. I should have gotten a more modern translation.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of was addicted to that style of wanting to preserve everything, but
Mm.
we've gone our style of translating is sort of to do chapter by chapter. Sort of I'll do one, and then she'll do the next, and then we switch off and edit it. And through her edits, I've seen so many issues with my approach that have been improved for the better.
That's cool. So it would be like you do chapter one, she does chapter two, and then you swap. You edit chapter one, and then sorry, you do chapter one, she does chapter two, and then swap. You edit chapter two, she edits chapter one. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of more. There's actually no chapters in the book, so we've just sort of
Ah, so you're
cut it up sort of
right.
arbitrarily,
Okay,
but sort of big chunks, and then switching them back and forth.
cool. I've not read anything translated by her, but I've got the chili bean paste clan on the mail in the mail to me now from Amazon. So I'm gonna get my first bite out of her translations quite soon. Looking forward to
Yeah,
it.
check it out, and also check out. She just did a book for ACA, Elaine Charles Asia, of another
Mhm.
Japinwa novel, Broken Wings. Highly
Right, yeah.
recommended, as well as Happy Dreams, which is one of my
Yeah.
favorite Japinwa novels she did.
I've been speaking to someone from ACA who just kind of randomly reached out via the podcast. So yeah, there might be watch this space. There might be something about one of their books on the show at some point in the future.
Mm.
Not sure which one yet. Maybe that one. Uh, Righty-ho. One more book to talk about. Last one I'm going to quiz you on, I think.
Okay.
So it's your own published translation, Record of Regret by Dongxi.
Yeah, I did it for University of Oklahoma Press. They did a book series, Chinese Literature Today, book series that includes the Jiapinghua Ruined City translation. There's a Moyan novel in there called Sandalwood Death.
Oh
It's
yeah.
Dongxi's sort of came of age around the same time as every other Chinese writer. Went to university in the 80s, and he eventually went into screenwriting, but he published a series of very popular novels in the 90s and early 2000s.
Right. And so I listened to a wee bit of of the podcast the Chinese literature podcast did with you. That was about this book. Um,
Yes, sir.
I didn't finish it. I think I didn't have time, but I'm not sure what we could talk about here that you didn't talk about on that episode. Is there anything you kind of wish you could have talked about more that we could cover that wouldn't be a repetition?
No, I don't think there's anything.
Ah, okay.
Just go and listen to that. It's been so long since I translated the book that I wasn't in love with it either, like I am with the Xiaopinghua novels. So
All right.
the less said about it, the better, maybe.
Hmm. So is there any danger if you're translating something that you maybe, I don't know if contempt is too strong of a word, if you're not totally into a book and you're translating it, is there a danger that you might not quite do it justice, or you might project your own dislike into the translation? Is that something you kind of
No, no,
consciously avoid? No.
no. I
Okay.
think the problem is resisting the urge to make it better. You know,
Oh, yes.
when you read like this really like hackneyed phrasing, and you think, oh, it would be so much better if he had said this, or oh, it's very stupid that this character enters the room at this time. It would be so much better if he entered the room after this character spoke. There's you have to resist that temptation. And
Right.
Dongxi is a great writer, but there were one issue with Chinese books is that they don't really see a publisher. They don't. There's no famous. Sorry, see an editor. There's not
Mm.
really famous editors in China. Even with short stories, nobody touches them. So if you're a writer like Jia Pinghua or even Dongxi, nobody is ever going to say, "Listen, you got to cut pages 5, 6, and 7. They don't add anything." So there is
All
an
right.
urge. There is an urge when you're translating to act as an editor,
Mm-hmm.
and you can do that to some extent, but you can't. you can't completely remake the damn book.
So there's no substantive editing. Is there any line editing, just like proofreading?
Yes, usually there's and things have to be proofread for political reasons, you know.
Right, of course, yeah.
So that's basically it. So like when let's say a big writer like Moyen turns a book in, he's going to do his revisions himself. Maybe he'll have somebody who works with him, just like his own employee or somebody who's with like the wherever. But when he turns it into the publisher, they're not going to send back suggestions to him except for perhaps proofreading things or political issues.
That's fascinating. Do you know why that is?
Um,
Or do you have a theory?
I have no idea and no theory really. It's just been that way for a very long time, and
Right.
it's almost all levels, like for even famous writers down to people who are just putting things out for the first time in literary journals.
Could it be out of a reverence for the author or not wanting the author to lose face?
I think that's part of it, and also there's just never that role for
Right.
for editors. As I say that, I think of some examples of literary journals that do sort of work with new writers on their work, but otherwise, no, it just doesn't exist.
Or another theory that's just popped into my head, maybe if it's from a time when there was less of a market-driven publishing industry, you wouldn't have to make changes to the book to make it more consumer-friendly. Could that be it, maybe?
Yeah, I could live with that theory.
Yeah.
I really have no idea exactly
Yeah.
why that's the case.
So, hello, listeners. If you're listening and you're screaming into your podcast listening device and you know the answer to this question, give us a message on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, because
Yes,
we need to get
please.
to the bottom of this.
Yes.
Okay, so I've been quizzing you for, oh my goodness, an hour and 12 minutes, hour and 30 minutes, actually. So, without wanting to take up too much of your time, could you maybe recommend for the listeners a translated Chinese book or author that they really ought to investigate?
Okay. I mean, I
Jiapingwa, right?
Xiaopinhua, but I think I mean I've said some negative things about Howard Goldblatt, but when he's at his best, he's at his best. He's amazing, and I would recommend his translation of Zhu Tianwen's Notes of a Desolate Man. It's in the original. It's Huang Ren Shouji. It's translated in 1994, I believe. I also want to say it came out on University of Hawaii Press or Columbia University Press.
Mm.
It is written by Zhu Tianwen. She's a Taiwanese woman writer. It's about a basically a gay man watching his partner die of AIDS. It's
Oh,
sort of set in 1990s Taipei, but many locations in between, and it's just basically one of the greatest works of Chinese literature, and it's also one of the greatest translations ever done.
sounds really interesting. That's something I've not. No, I have considered Taiwanese authors for the show because San Mao had her birthday not so long ago, and I posted about that. But yeah, that could be an interesting first Taiwanese book to look at.
Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
a new translation of San Mao coming out very soon, done by uh, my colleague from the Shanghai Literary Review, Mike Fu. He's a very good translator,
Ah,
and he's got a new San Mao book coming out soon.
he got recommended to me by one of my old pals from Shanghai, um, Mike Fu. But yeah, the Shanghai Literary Review, I did, when I was living there, I did have some contact with them. I read a story at one of their events, but they couldn't publish it because it was a bit too sensitive.
Oh
Um,
dear.
but yeah, we might get Mike or someone else from TSLR on the show. That would be cool. Also wanted to say what you said about Howard Goldblatt. So I think on the Wang Shuo episode, I cast some aspersions on him, which was stupid because I'm not a translator. And also at that time I didn't know he was the Godfather. He was
Oh
just a
yeah.
name in my book.
Yeah.
So yeah, if Howard Goldblatt, if you're listening, we think you're great.
I'm sure he's not listening. I'm sure
No.
he's sitting like in some beautiful retreat somewhere, and he's just surrounded by translations he completed many years ago, waiting for them to be published and for the royalty checks to come in.
Well, good for him.
Hell yeah, good for him.
Yeah. Okay. So on that note, thank you so much for spending so much time on the show. I'll probably make this a separate episode from the Dingling episode, just because it's so lengthy. It's going to outlength anything I can say about Miss Sophie's Diary. So this will be episode 8, I think.
All right, wonderful. And please cut
Okay.
me saying anything offensive.
Oh yeah, anything that will get you off to Tokyo jail or China jail will be out. Don't worry.
Thank you.
Okay. So toodaloo. Enjoy your day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. So there we go, the man himself, Dylan Levi King. Thank you so much, Dylan, for coming onto the show and having such a fab chat. I really enjoyed that, and I'm looking forward to getting more people on the show. Pretty much anyone can come on, by the way. I'm not just hoping to talk to translators, people from publishing houses, and authors. I'd also just welcome anyone who enjoys reading books from China. If you've got a book you'd like to talk about, zap me a message, we can discuss it. If you want to just dictate an episode, then if you can donate 20 USD to the Patreon or the Buy Me a Coffee, you're the boss for one episode. You get to take over. But in any case, please do reach out. I'd love to chat with people. If you want to be on the show, I'd love to get you on. I have a few ideas for what the next episode is going to be. I'm going to deliberate on what those are, and then I will announce ahead of time on the Instagram. So remember, that's TrChFic. That's where you can find out all news about the show and upcoming episodes. Go follow it. And if you're not on Instagram, well, you really should be, because my goodness, it's 2019. Come on, what are you doing? Come on! Anyway, thank you so much. That's all for today. Our longest episode yet is now over. 再见.